So now we're going to go into Logic and we're going to start the more interesting, complicated, but much more fun way to use external MIDI devices in Logic. Don't be scared by what we're about to start. It's a little complicated, but once you get the idea down and start doing it, it's a lot of fun. You need the MIDI implementation chart for your device. It's typically toward the end of your device's user manual, and they're called different things. You could be looking for something called a voice table, a MIDI implementation chart, a MIDI voice table. They're called many things. Your table will have the names of all the banks and patches on your instrument, along with MSB and LSB information. Now, this is kind of old school and it can be kind of hard to find on Google, but sometimes you can Google this information. It's actually easier if you could just locate your user manual, but I've included two examples. This one here, the one on the left, is actually from my Korg N1 user manual, and it gives the MSB and LSB information for two of my banks. The one on the right is for a Roland Phantom, which I don't have, but it gives the MSB and LSB information for I think one of the banks, maybe more, but at least one of the banks on a Roland Phantom. You need this before you get into Logic. And this is an easier to see a chart from my Korg N1. It's actually called a voice list table. It's in the back of my manual. And this gives information, the MSB and the LSB information for two of the sound banks on my Korg. I'll need this to enter into Logic so I can access these banks. There's actually close to about 20 banks on a Korg N1, but Logic can only access 14 or 15 banks. I think it's 15. So to give Logic access to more than two of my user banks, I would need the MSB and LSB data for each bank. Again, don't get scared by all of this. It's actually a lot of fun. Once you get it set up, you've got access to a lot of audio patches and samples from your keyboard, from old gear. And it's a lot of fun. So we're about to have some fun. And this is an example of the MSB and LSB information for one. Yeah, it looks like it's one of the banks. It looks like it's the A bank from a Roland Phantom, which I don't have, but it just kind of gives you some information. This is the kind of information that you'll be looking for your own external MIDI gear. If you happen to be lucky enough to own any of these old keyboards or tone generators, these are already set up for you in Logic, and you don't need the MSB or LSB information. You don't need any of it. You just pick this from when you get into Logic, you just pick these and whatever you have, and you're good to go. The only thing I will add is these have not been updated in Logic in years because they're old. And a lot of people tend to go with software instruments instead of external MIDI. So this hasn't been updated in a long time. Apple is, as far as I know, they're not planning on adding any more instruments to this list. But like I said, if you're lucky enough to own any of these, they're still around. You can just plug it in, pick it, and go with it. Note at the bottom that the Alesis bank messages in Logic, just it says Alesis, but those bank messages don't work with all Alesis products. Uh, I'm not even sure why it's there because I have no idea what Alesis product it works with. But anyway, I can guarantee you that the Roland JV 2080, um, those bank messages do work because I took a class with somebody who had a Roland JV 2080, and sure enough, it works. It's all set up in Logic for you. I don't have any of these, but if you do, you're lucky. So once you have your MIDI implementation table for your instrument, whether it's an Akai drum machine, a Roland drum machine, um, a Korg N1 or a similar type of keyboard, um, the Korg Volca. I think it's a Korg Volca bass, and there's a drum machine and stuff like that. Those are all external MIDI, and they all have their own MIDI implementation tables. So once you have your MIDI implementation table in front of you with the MSB and LSB information, then we're good to go in Logic. And that's the next step. So we're going to open Logic, a blank project. Don't open something you're working on. You're going to open a blank project, and you're going to add an external MIDI track. So we're going to go to New. We're going to add external MIDI, and we're going to uncheck this option to use an external MIDI plugin. Okay? You're going to choose your Korg or whatever instrument you're using. Okay? And then click on Create. Now you'll notice that there are a bunch of new options here that you did not have when you were using the external instrument plugin. You don't have any of this stuff here. This is why I like going the old school way. All right, so my Korg has 16 channels on it. All right, for now I'm going to leave. I can choose another. All right, for right now, for the MIDI in channel, I could choose channel 1. For right now, I'm going to leave it at all. The MIDI out port, you want that to be the instrument you're working on, your Korg N1 or whatever instrument you have plugged in. Important thing is to tick off this box, this checkbox here that's next to Program. All right? That tells Logic that it is going to control your keyboard. So this is our external MIDI channel. We haven't done anything to it yet. You will notice when you look over here in the track inspector, in the inspector on the left, this is just MIDI. There's no audio faders at all. This is the fader for the master. There is no fader for this channel because it's not audio. So we could proceed from here and finish setting up our external MIDI, but when you start recording on it, you're going to be disappointed because there's no audio track. So I like to set up audio before I go any further. And to do that, you're going to hit X to open the mixer. Okay, and we are going to add a bus. So we're going to create a new auxiliary channel strip and change the input to whatever you've got your instrument plugged into. In my case, it's input 5 and 6 for the piano. Okay, bring the fader up a little bit. So now when we actually start working with this external MIDI, it's going to go to, there's going to be an audio output for it too. Okay. You could change that name. See where it says aux1. You could change that to piano external MIDI, something like that. Okay. Now hit X to close the mixer. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is go into the environment. Don't be scared. This is old school. You used to have to do this for every external MIDI gear you plugged into Logic, and the old version of Logic's older versions of Logic, you had to use the environment for everything. This is not scary. You're going to hit Command 0 to open the environment. Okay? Under Layer, you're going to select MIDI instrument. And that is the MIDI instrument that we have. That's this MIDI instrument right here. You're going to see these little boxes. These are all 16 channels of MIDI. Okay? Right now, there's nothing in these, but what we're going to do is we're going to set up the banks so that in a future lesson here, we can pick our programs from Logic, and it will select the programs on your keyboard or on your instrument. Right now, these don't do anything.